Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to our inaugural Wealth Owners Forum. I really appreciate your being here to help us get launched in the discussion among owners about really important things related to family enterprises. I'm Sara Hamilton. I'm the CEO at Fox. I'm going to be your guide this morning, along with Alexander Monnier, our president, in a very interesting, I think you'll find, and stimulating discussion about 4 families that are a little bit ahead of in the journey where most of you all are. So a bit of information about who's in the room today. We have about 45 owners who are here. About a third of them are from outside the US. And the profile of the groups is a very interesting combination of 24% first generation, 45% second generation, and another 26% who are third generation. So most of you all are standing on the G1 to G3 bridge, we call it, looking back at where you came from and looking forward at where you're going together. And we're going to spend about an hour this morning having a conversation about how families thoughtfully go on this journey of trying to plan and organize a strong enterprise that can last for the third generation's grandchildren even. We're going to take about a short coffee break at 10 o'clock. The restrooms, if the closest ones, are going to be down the steps and to the left when you go out by the registration desk. And we'll come back here at 10:30 and you'll hear from 4 different principals from families who are in the 4th generation to the 6th generation in their journey. Because I think it's always really informational for you to hear down the road what it's going to be like 50 years from now in your family, and to learn more about what they've learned along their journey. So we have 4 very courageous volunteers who are going to tell us about their family stories. We're going to have a Q&A session, and you're going to be able to ask them questions. We'll then have a lunch break. We'll go outside here and have lunch if it's not too warm. And then we'll come back in the afternoon, and you'll be able to participate in 2 breakout sessions with the speakers and ask them more questions. And we'll begin to talk about your own challenges and what you're focused on, what you're thinking about in a peer-based discussion where you can talk to each other about what's on your mind and what you'd like to get some help with for those activities. And then we'll take another break. We'll have 2 more breakout sessions at the end of the day that I'll tell you about before we break for lunch. And then we'll wrap up with cocktails from 5 to 7 this evening. So we've tried to pace it so that it's not too intense in the process, and that you'll have a chance to really have time to talk with each other. And I encourage you to walk up and introduce yourself and identify what generation you are and what kind of family business your family was in, because it gives other people perspective on where you're coming from. And you'll find that knowing the members of Fox here, people are very generous with their time and their insights, and it can be the most beneficial part of the time you spend together. So we're going to begin this morning with a conversation for about 50 minutes about the building blocks that families are using. I know that all of you all have a great appreciation for the hard work that founders did to create what they put together. And I know some of you have experienced the personal sacrifice that all families feel when someone has dedicated themselves to building a really productive family business. Many families stay focused on this stage of being a business-centric family for many, many years. But at some point in their history, the evolution begins and the family starts to realize that they have grown bigger than just a business in terms of who they are. So I'm going to take you on that journey of defining what it means to be a family enterprise, how you know when you are one, what they look like, what kind of dimensions that they have in terms of characteristics. And then I'm going to start talking to you about the building blocks that help you focus on ways to strengthen the enterprise that you've been working on. And we've been working on these principles for over 25 years, pulling them from families who are doing something really unique or really thoughtful along the way. And we've worked this past year to summarize them. There's a sheet of paper in front of you that is actually in the book behind the slides that shows you the 36 building blocks that we think are important for you to be thinking about. So I'm going to take you on that journey. We're going to focus on only 12 of them with examples, but we'll be coming out next year with a Fox guide to the enterprise building blocks, and we'll be giving you examples for all 36 of the activities that you might consider trying. So I encourage you to take this sheet of paper as we go through it and circle the things that you know that you're focused on, and put a check mark on those things that you think you've gotten done already, and make yourself kind of a scorecard on where you are and where your focus is. You'll see that they're in 4 main categories, and I'll walk you through and explain those. And then we can take questions about those at the end of the program. The operative question that we always begin with is, when does a family turn into a family enterprise? The evolution occurs gradually, as you might expect. A founder starts a business. The business acquires property. A successful business generates wealth that, at a certain level, the wealth impacts the choices that the family makes, and it has both positive effects sometimes and sometimes negative effects. It offers the opportunity for you to think in a very broad way about well-being that goes with wealth and what that means in your family. It gives you the opportunity to think about giving back to the community. So there are many different dimensions to being a family enterprise. Enterprises develop and evolve over time. So it starts with a founder of who has a business. He meets a perceptive estate planner who tells him that he needs to put the assets in the business in a trust. The trust builds as the business becomes successful. The family starts adding real estate to the business. They start buying personal property that goes with that activity. Vacation property. Perhaps they launch a family foundation over time. Then the complexity of what the family has itself compels them to think about starting a family office. Maybe there's a second family business in the process. There's an investment partnership for the liquidity that the family creates, and other entrepreneurial investment activities, perhaps. And finally, as things continue to evolve, maybe the family feels the need for a private trust company. We've seen a lot of families in the last 10 years take on this structure as to manage their governance activity. There might be a real estate management company that manages the property that came out of the business that the family still owns. Some direct private equity investing. Some activities around the next generation entrepreneurs and helping them get started. And maybe there's even a thing called a family bank where the family is financing some of this activity. So every family has a picture of how they came to be who they are and how complicated they are in their activities. And it's a very instructive activity just to make this drawing of what's in your enterprise and what it looks like for those activities. When you organize these activities around as a total picture, you get kind of this starburst picture here. You'll see the inner ring is focused on personal activities that relate to you as an individual. Your inherited wealth, your personal property, your personal shares of the business, the personal giving patterns, activities, the charities that you support, and your personal health activities and maintaining that. And then there's an outer ring that provides the connectivity for you to the rest of the family and the activities that are bigger than yourself. Staying together as a family, owning a business together, sharing common vacation property, being a steward of future generations, and making bigger philanthropic commitments as a family group than you would be able to make by yourself. So this picture could look different for any family group, but it needs to be relevant to you at a personal level on the inner circle, and it needs to be relevant to the whole family on the outer circle. When you organize these activities around common goals, you'll see that the top 3 sections of this starburst are related to the family's values for unity, continuity, and good relationships among family members and within the community that you live. When you add the sections that relate to owning a business and having property together, you add additional complexity to the enterprise. And when you add inherited wealth and stewardship for the next generation, this brings even more complexity to the family group, and it brings in the green part. All these together define different aspects of what we would call a complex family enterprise. One of my favorite enterprise stories is about a family that started a railway station business about 100 years ago in a faraway country, moved into the automobile dealership business and the gasoline supply business, and now 100 years later, is a full-blown energy management company. They say adamantly in their family that it was critical for the first 3 generations that they be owners and managers of the business, and after that stage, it was critical for them not to be managers, but to be owners of the business, so that they could grow and diversify and continue to stay competitive by hiring the very best people that they could find. This group is closely tied together by a family foundation. They have a governing council that includes representatives from all 4 branches of the family. So when they have a family council meeting, there's 16 people sitting around the table, and there's a lot of banter and a lot of discussion. And they're currently focused on the topic of owner education. How are they going to educate the 40 young people coming down the pike who are taking over in the next generation? If you can relate some ways to this kind of a story or see it as a picture of where your future might go, you know that families are doing everything they can to ensure that they stay strong as an enterprise. We hope that these building blocks, which we're going to take you through, will be helpful for you to think about what's the picture that you want to create over time. How hard do you want to work at making sure that it actually works out? And what specific activities you can do to organize this process. So this is a picture of that, what the governing structure ends up looking like for a really complicated organization like the one that I just described that now is training I think the G5s in their generation. So things along the way can get more complicated. They can start out very simple. They should start out very simple. Most of you being 1st, 2nd, and 3rd generation family members can still fit around the dining room table, and governance can be very informal when you're still sitting around the dining room table. But it gets more and more complicated as the family moves on, and the evolution of how you organize yourself and make decisions begins to change. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the 12 building blocks we're going to focus on today are organized in 4 different groupings. The first is getting owners engaged and building leaders. Since you can't stay together without concerned owners and capable leaders, it's critical to really spend some time focusing on that topic. The second is the vision for the family enterprise of the future. Where is it you're going together, and what are you hoping to accomplish as a unit? Where are the common interests? The third part is about a respected governance process, something that everyone can believe in and organize around and commit to follow, so that there's a process that people can count on for decision making and for sharing information with each other. And the last is action steps and accountability. A critical one that sometimes we don't get to often enough, but without productive action and real accountability as a family to each other, no one stays around, and a gradual decline will begin because people are not seeing progress occur. So let's take a short journey and learn from the many Fox families who've taught us about these building blocks along the way. There are going to be 3 action items that we're going to look at for each of the 12 building blocks that are here. And I'm going to show you one example from those 3 of something that a family is doing or an activity we've tried with family groups to help them get focused on a particular topic. So I'll move you fairly quickly through this process. And again, we'll have a booklet about all of them coming out probably by about May. And we'll be doing a workshop on all 26 of these in much more detail in May, from the 2nd to the 4th of May, probably back here in Miami, if you are interested in going into more detail. So this is kind of the 20-foot level of these concepts, and then we'll be able to go deeper. So we're going to start with owner engagement and leadership. The first building block we're going to look at is one called encourage owner involvement. And one of the most critical steps in this process is to talk to the owners and the beneficiaries about where their areas of interest are and what they're willing to commit time to. And we've actually got a little exercise that you can use to map out, how many days a year, how much time a month is the next generation willing to help the family to be able to stay together, to be able to contribute so that they can stay together. In our country, one of the biggest dilemmas that we have as family enterprises is that we have, for the last 20 years, told our children to go out and find themselves and develop their personal skills and understand who they are and find their own way in the world. And they've all done that very effectively. And they're very comfortable where they are and with the life that they've built and the work that they're doing. And as the time is coming where you need the 45-year-olds to come back and oversee and look after the family enterprise, it's become very difficult in our culture for us to get family members to take the time to come back and watch over the broader enterprise, because they see the inner circle about the things that relate to themselves personally, but they aren't as connected to the things that are in the outer ring of that starburst picture. And so it's been really complicated for families to figure out how to bridge that gap and to decide who's going to oversee what we have for our activities for the next 20 years and how we're going to engage those families. So you want to identify areas of interest. You want to match education programs to areas of interest. So be teaching them things that the family, young people feel are relevant, and develop individualized learning programs. The example we have here is a roadmap of the learning strategies that are needed for each age group. And these were built a number of years ago by the CEOs who run family offices who've been doing this for 20 years or more, and we sat together and pooled everyone's knowledge about what is it that everyone needs to learn at certain age groups, so that there are concrete skills identified and activities can be developed around those particular skills. You need to be able to show a 16-year-old what it is they need to learn at that stage, because it's all very amorphous to them. You know, it's hard for them to grasp what it is, what role they're going to play, and what it is that they need to learn. After owner involvement comes defining responsible ownership. This is a really important one, we think, because you've got to train owners about the skills, the attitudes, and the behaviors that your family feels are appropriate for individuals who are going to be owners in the enterprise. What does responsibility really mean in your family? You've got to think about, define the difference between family members who are being actively engaged in oversight and those who are passively engaged and are deferring more of their decision-making authority to those family members who are actively engaged. You want to allow people to make their choice about, given a particular period in their life, which category they fit into, and to have the ability to move back and forth between those two categories. And you want to hold family members accountable for their behavior. It's one of the challenges in, but building a strong enterprise means that we are holding each other accountable for constructive and positive behavior as a part of the family system. The third building block in this section is to develop a leadership development process, to really thoughtfully think about how are we going to train the new leaders in our families. And you'll hear a lot about this from our panelists today. So I'll just briefly say that what I've put up here as the tools is identify the unique skills that each individual has to offer. This map over here is this circle drawing is a picture of a family's skill set pool from 5 cousins who have different things to bring to the family. And they've spent time learning about each other's skills and what they can rely on the other people for. And it's really helped strengthen their bonds together. And it's helped them be able to have a conversation about where are the common interests? What is it that's in the center of the circle that we all agree we want to do together? And what are the things that we are going to happily agree that we're not going to do together, so that we have our own individuality in addition to being part of this enterprise? We want to specify the qualifications of what it means to lead and offer opportunities for family members to test their skills and to use the skills that they've put together. As one of my clients says, we want to move from practicing in the gym to being on the playing field, where we have a chance to show the skills that we've developed and to test each other so we can understand who we can count on in the family and who we can't. They believe that staying too long in the gym can actually kill the enthusiasm that the family has. The next section that we're going to look at is about having a clear vision for the future. Without a clear vision for what you're building, you may not be happy with the outcome. The first building block in the process is understanding how the past influences the future. Preserving the history, sharing stories about success and failure. The stories of failure are just as important, and even more so, the research shows, than the stories of success. And how you got up and started again and dusted off your knees and got going with a new strategy is what creates the perseverance that's really important in families who want to stay together. Respecting traditions, celebrating rites of passage is key for families, and identifying the culture the family has and how it influences behavior has become a topic in the last few years that a lot of work is being done around. Culture describes how you get things done in your family. Whether you collaborate on work or whether you divide and conquer is a characteristic of culture. Do you consolidate power or do you distribute it out in the family group? Do you reward effort and accept failure as a part of your family's enterprise? Or are you a group that encourages people not to take risk and not to jar the status quo? All of those are dimensions of culture. And understanding your culture helps you understand change that needs to come. It helps you understand what the status quo means. And it's the natural instinct for all of us to preserve the status quo, the things that have gotten us to where we are, the history that's made us proud of who we are. And yet, it's exactly the status quo that can take a family down if they aren't paying attention to what needs to change. Because if nothing changes over long periods of time, there is a natural predictive decline in what's going to happen with the family. So you want to create a culture that encourages people to feel good about change and to think about what's coming down the pike and how you want to grow things and change them. The second building block we're going to look at is respecting the values and the guiding principles. And what you see here in this picture is a case study that we built for Fall Forum around the Tucker family. Margaret and I did a session on visioning and how a family develops a long-range vision, and we created a profile of who the Tuckers were, and we spent time mapping along the bottom of the history chart. You'll see the patterns, values, and guiding principles that define this family and that make them who they are, and that are the ones that they need to think thoughtfully about which of these guiding principles do we want to carry forward and which of them do we want to leave behind as we make our new path into the future. One of the most important things that anyone has ever taught me over the years is a comment from Jay Hughes, who said, every generation is a first generation. And every generation has to figure out what makes it important for them to be a part of this enterprise. So living someone else's dream from the past is never going to free the individual and their group of cousins to be who they want to be. So at every stage, you ask the next generation, soon it will be your turn to think about where we're going next. And it's our job to prepare you to be ready for that, but it's your job to think about the vision and to be really thoughtful with your cousins group to think about, or your siblings group to think about where you want to go together. The third building block is actually building the vision itself. And a visioning process involves clarifying where the common goals are, identifying driving forces and key uncertainties that will affect your future, what's out there in the world that's going to impact what we have today and where we want to go in the future, and create a clear vision for the future. We use a technique called scenario planning to do this that is focused around looking at a whole series of alternatives that can help a family develop a clear vision of what might be and what they'd like to see happen, that allows them to hone down to what it is they really want to accomplish. Some of the questions that you can use when you're going through that process is, what do we most want to leave for our grandchildren? What do we want to be there 30 years from now? What are the reasons to stay together in our family? And are they compelling enough to get us to do the work we need to do to stay together? What does the shared vision of the family look like? And how do we draw in the younger generation to make sure they want to be a part of what we're building? And the ultimate picture of what a shared vision might look like when you build it is your version of a house. You know, at the top are your goals and principles and the culture that you've created as a family. And in every room in the house, there's a different dimension to what you value and what you organize. Some family enterprises have only 2 domains to them. They care about the family and they care about the business. And in other cases, if they've expanded and they're fully developed, they may no longer have a business as a part of one of the rooms, but they may have a lot of other activities that they really value that makes it important for them to stay together as a family. The next set of building blocks that helps you develop is a respect for the governance process. This is a complicated one, as you can imagine, because if you don't have a clear vision of where you're going, it's really hard to put together a governance structure. I guarantee you will end up doing it over again if you don't start with clarity about where you're going. And then you figure out what the organizing shape needs to look like so that you can stay together. So you build structures that support the vision. You need a culture that embraces change. Here you can see this is a wonderful drawing from Yvonne Landsberg and Barbara Dunn around how you get from a siblings partnership to a cousins consortium at the top. And it takes a series of dimensions that involves disengagement from where you are, exploration of what the possibilities are about where you're going, and a commitment to the future stage once you've had an opportunity to figure out what that really means. You want to evaluate in this era the process, focus most on the process that you want to use to help you get the vision to a stage of action where you're really ready to work on it. The second building block is using transparent communication. The ladder of inference is a tool that Margaret has taught me about that helps you access how you interpret messages. And it trains everyone to understand that we all move from an event, something that actually happens, up through the ladder of inference to a place where we take action and we interpret and we infer things and we draw conclusions that sometimes can alter the reality of what is actually being stated in this activity. In this particular area of governance, you want to report regularly to the family in a transparent manner and make sure you're getting feedback from everyone. As you get bigger into the 3rd generation and beyond, you have to systematically think about how are we going to get feedback, especially when people live in different countries and different time zones, and it's much harder for you to get together when families are young and children are being raised. You want to ensure that there are consistent levels of communication by branch and by generation. When some branches are communicating more effectively than others, a learning gap is created between those who are paying attention and those who aren't. And it can create complexities later on in the process when you're trying to actually make decisions. So many families use the family office as the central coordinating point of communication to make sure that everyone gets the same information and gets it in a consistent manner. You want to update family members about priorities and about changes and about progress that you're making. One of the biggest challenges when you're in the middle of a family system is to actually be able to see progress being made, because the same topics come to the table for discussion, The same voices are heard. Sometimes the messages are fairly similar from an annual meeting to an annual meeting, and actually documenting that you're making some progress. Having someone come in from the outside who can say, wow, do you realize that this is where you were 12 months ago and this is where you are now? Because it's really hard to see that when you're in the middle of the system yourself and you feel like you're hearing the same things all the time. It helps people to stay involved in the process. The third building block in the governance process is to manage critical transitions in a proactive manner. So we talked earlier about the fact that change is difficult and leaving the status quo is hard for families to do. The natural trigger points that help a family realize they're making a shift is when some sort of triggering event is occurring. There's a change in the trust structure. There's the sale of an operating business. There's the purchase of another business. There's the entrance of a new generation into the governing process where they're taking on leadership roles. All kinds of different activities really serve as change agents, and they're opportune times for you to think about how it is that you want to begin to make changes in the process. The last set of building blocks is about action steps and accountability. The first block itself is clear strategies and proactive planning. And when you have a major family enterprise, you want to always be thinking about where are the opportunities and where are the risks going to be in our system for our business, for our definition of where we're going. Where is that opportunity set that we need to be focused on? You want to conduct periodic planning sessions that run across all the different aspects of the business. You have to make sure that the planning is done in tandem. If you have operating companies and family unity as a goal, and you have a family office as a point of coordination, you want to be operating in conjunction with each other as you think about planning strategies that you put together. If the family's need for liquidity impacts the strategies that you can put in place for the business, and the business's need for growth impacts the family's ability to have liquidity. And that conversation has to be discussed in parallel for everyone to be understanding that they're interconnected and that there are complexities around this. Transitions in one area can really affect other parts of the enterprise, and you need to know where those are. Implementing action steps in a timely manner helps the family to see that progress is being made. This next item is about providing formal feedback to assess your process. In all family enterprises, one of the things we suffer from is the lack of honest feedback. Because we're not a corporation where we have annual reviews and business feedback. We're a group of relatives with each other, and it's very difficult for any of us to truly get honest feedback from the other members of our family. So it's really helpful if you establish a policy and a process and a pattern of operating where people are regularly getting feedback, especially for new leaders who are coming into the mix, because they're trying to find out if they're doing a good job for the family. And the family doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so they get part of the feedback from the system. So in many family enterprises, the actual feedback cycle is provided by outsiders who are not a part of the system. They get input from all the family members, but there's an intermediary there who can organize and sort that tough news in some cases. And this is an example of a monitoring tool that we use with a family that's based in Spain who have 7 new leaders coming into new positions. And We have a qualitative and a quantitative feedback tool that they get feedback on twice a year. So to ensure that they're actually hearing real, honest, constructive feedback about how they're doing in the role that they're playing. Because they're going to be in these leadership roles for a very long time, and they really are interested in knowing how this links to the skills they have and the job that they've been asked to do. You want to revise priorities on a periodic basis. When you're in the leadership role and you're looking at feedback, you want to show the family that you're evaluating the changes that may need to be made, and you're willing to accommodate something new that's come into the system. And you want to establish metrics for continuing education. We are firm believers that every owner needs at least 40 hours of continuing education a year, just like professionals who work in your office. That would be 5 days of interaction and thoughtful learning that goes on for a family group. And if every member of the family took the time to use a week of their time to make sure that they're continuing to learn and grow, then the system will continue to learn and grow. If the only time you meet and talk about the enterprise is when you get together with the family, so you're telling each other the same stories and reinforcing each other's view of where the world is, you're not going to get input from the outside world. So you need to be at programs like this and to go into activities that allow you to get exposure from other family groups. That's why I think these 4 stories that you're going to hear this morning are going to be so valuable. The third building block is to establish accountability for performance. Clear metrics for measuring performance. What does success mean in our family? How are we going to measure success? Is it just a dollar figure? What are the qualitative things that really are going to tell us whether or not we enjoy this enterprise and we're glad that we have it and it's enriching us rather than draining us in activity? It's not easy to select those metrics, but you really want to focus on that as a family and decide where you're going to put your measurements around success. Enjoyment of each other is a great measure. Percentage of people who actually take the time to come to an annual cousins meeting is a great indicator of activity. In addition to the logical connection that exists there between performance in a family business and unity in the family, and I think you'll hear some of our panelists this morning talk about this. Obviously, it's much harder for a family to stay together if they aren't feeling successful in the business activities that they do together or in the investment activities that they do together. So there are certainly quantitative benchmarks that go along, but there are also just as many and should be just as many qualitative ones that a family takes a look at. So this was an attempt on our part to help families. This is actually the view of a family office scorecard that identifies in a hypothetical case how the office was going to be evaluated, what the metrics were that mattered to the family members. You want to hold managers accountable for performance and take action as needed. So inaction in the family is something that becomes inertia over time, and inertia is something that kills a family. The lack of energy in the activities that you have going on are something that can really drag the family down and get it started slowing down in its activities together. And the last dimension is identifying experienced advisors who can give you objective comparisons to other family enterprises, to other activities. They can provide the feedback loop that you need to get about how the pace at which you're moving and whether they can organize the feedback that you get from each other about whether people are happy with what's being done and how quickly it's getting done in the family system. So when you put all these things together, you can organize them in this way in kind of a circular format. You can pick out the ones that you're focused on right now. You don't have to have all 12 in a circle at the same time, but you can decide which ones are critical in your family at this particular stage. And get everyone to put some energy around getting a clear definition for each of these terms. Narrow in your system. Pick the 6 on the paper that are timely for you all and seem to be your most delicate points or the pain centers where the family is having trouble making progress or having a conversation about some things. Get some outside help. If sometimes there are inflection points in a family system that it's easier for someone from the outside to see than it is for someone inside the family system to understand, because you're a part of it, you're in the culture, and there's an observational thing about seeing it from afar that gives you the ability to sometimes put it together better and to know when to ask a critical question. I think that is always key. There are some questions that it's really hard for you to ask each other as family members, and the questions sometimes really need to be asked from that standpoint. So the 12 building blocks in summary look like, this is a picture of them. If you need a tool for conversation in your family that is looks a little bit simpler than the broader one that's on the paper, this is a good tool to take to a family meeting, to have just to say to the group as you sit around the dining room table or around a larger board table and say, how do you think we're doing around all of these 12 activities? And where do we need to put some energy and some focus? And who should we assign to the different activities that we need to focus on? You might not undertake more than 3 or 4 of these at any one time because you want to show some success. You want the family to feel that you're making some progress because it's very uplifting for the family group to be dealing with that. So that's the story about the family enterprise. I think I've got just a few minutes if anybody has any specific question about building blocks or something I have forgotten that's really important. It would be really valuable to us to know what that might be.